of mild to moderate cases of COVID. We all know that this is a very difficult topic because a lot of protocols have been circulated, a lot of research has come. Some research is good, some is not so good. My job today would be to streamline on what should be the adequate treatment for mild to moderate cases. We have divided these classes into two series. Today we are discussing mild to moderate, and in the next class we will discuss management of severe cases of COVID. So there's some slide glitch. Just give me 2 minutes. So, what are the key respiratory symptoms in the context of COVID-19? We all know these symptoms: cough, fever, sore throat, shortness of breath, anosmia. These are some of the major symptoms. Lot of loss of taste, which is called as ageusia, or it can be altered taste, which can be dysgeusia. These can be some of the symptoms which patients generally come with. As per the literature, 70 to 80% cases of symptoms, the most common symptom is fever. The fever definition is fever more than 99°F. There may be certain other symptoms which can be there and which are also common, like myalgias, weaknesses, loss of weakness, diarrhea, GI symptoms. I'm sure you must have seen patients with COVID coming through GI symptoms, and certain symptoms related to other organs are also present, particularly neurological. But most of the time, the symptoms are mainly involved with the respiratory system. So, what are the clinical manifestations of mild to moderate disease? As we understood, it has a whole lot of clinical manifestation. And in the current situation, obviously now the pandemic is on the waning fires. But as we are preparing for the next wave, and as we are discussing, United Kingdom has already started seeing a rise in COVID cases, and they have reached to 15,000 cases a day. The lockdown there also has been extended till July 16th. So, as we are preparing for the next wave of pandemic, it's very important that we understand that the manifestations can be hugely variable. It can be from respiratory to GI to neurological symptoms. Diagnosis is mainly through RT-PCR test, which we all know, or through antigen test. Now, the antigen test, the benefit is that it is very, very inexpensive, cheap, and it's a point of care test. We get an immediate results in 15 to 20 minutes. While RT-PCR will take about 6 to 12 hours, but the specificity of RT-PCR is much better than antigen. We have to understand that there are certain medications which have been shown to have effect. We'll discuss them in great detail in the current next coming slides. But the center point is all infection control practices, use of personal protective equipment for healthcare workers, social distancing, and more frequent testing. This is a very good diagrammatic representation from New England Journal of Medicine in NEJM. This paper came which discussed about treatment of mild to moderate disease. Now, if you see, the initial phase is asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic phase. Even in that phase, there are no symptoms. So this generally happens 5 to 7 days before the disease. If you screen these patients at that point of time, or if you have the test will come out positive or may come out positive. Isolation, yes, they will need isolation, but viral replication has already started. As you can see, the virus is now increasing in numbers. A potential treatment at this point of time in the form of antiviral therapy may help in decreasing the viral load and may also help in decreasing the transmission from mild to moderate or from moderate to severe disease. But please understand there's no role of antibody therapy or antibiotic therapy. and there's no role of anti-inflammatory therapy. In this, you mainly have to monitor the symptoms for any progression of symptoms to mild disease. So this is a asymptomatic phase or very mild symptoms in the form of myalgias. After some days, 5 to 7 days, comes the mild illness, where patients generally come with fever, cough, change in taste, change in smell. If we do a diagnostic testing, it will come out to be positive. There's a 70% chance that diagnostic test will come out positive, but still a 30% chance that will come to be negative. Isolation, yes, and we have to give some therapies to decrease the viral load. Treatment is mainly in the form of clinical monitoring and supportive care. Some of these patients will convert to moderate cases. And what are those? Where you have radiological evidence of lower respiratory tract involvement. In the mild cases, the disease is mainly restricted to upper respiration. But in the moderate cases, the disease progresses to LRTI, and you will find that the patient's saturation, okay, will generally go to less than 94%, and the respiratory rate will increase from normal to between 30. So that's what we call as moderate illness. The respiratory rate will be less than 30. Saturation will be borderline, and some of these patients may require hospitalization. High comorbid patients in this scenario can deteriorate, and there may be a possible role of aggressive antiviral therapy, and we'll discuss. And after that, there is severe illness, where the saturation goes to less than 94%. Patient's respiratory rate goes to more than 30. Diagnostic testing is required. Isolation, yes, you may have a role to give some anti-inflammatory therapies here, but definitely oxygen therapy, hospitalization, and specific therapies are required. And then there is critical illness, where you have a respiratory failure, shock, multi-organ dysfunction, and a good intensive care, a good supportive care by a team of physicians, doctors, nurses, and critical care specialists is needed to get the best outcome. Anti-inflammatory therapies are the mainstay of therapies in severe to critical illness. Since today we are only discussing till moderate, and severity will be taken in the Friday class, we'll take this part of the disease. So, what are the risk factors? The risk factors are old age more than 65. There's a high likelihood that these patients will progress from asymptomatic to mild to moderate disease. Patients with chronic lung diseases, particularly COPD, they have a high incidence of severity. Patients with cardiovascular disease, those who have coronary artery disease or cardiomyopathy or heart failure, these patients are at higher chances of deterioration. So it's very important that we manage these patients. Then patients with chronic kidney disease, those patients who have stage 1, stage 2 or stage 3 kidney problem, they are at higher risk of disease. Sickle cell patients, obesity, body mass index more than 30 have a higher chance of deterioration. Immunocompromised patients, particularly those who are patients of solid organ transplant and cancer survivors, they all have higher chance of disease illness. Now, this is a diagrammatic representation of how the virus transmits according to the stage of infection. Please samjhiye, please understand. There are three phases. One is pre-symptomatic phase, one is symptomatic phase, and one is post-acute symptomatic phase, जिसको आजकल हम post-COVID syndrome बोल रहे हैं. RNA detectable in respiratory samples, blood and feces. Yes. So RNA will be detectable in all three situations, whether the patient is pre-symptomatic, symptomatic, or post-COVID. But does that RNA means it's an active virus or it's a dead virus? We do not know. So अगर आप next column में जाएं, viable virus detected in respiratory samples, pre-symptomatic and symptomatic phase, you will see the live virus. But in post-COVID syndromes, you are not seeing the live virus. That is why these patients are non-infected. But patients in pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic or symptomatic phase are infected. So they can transmit disease through droplet. They can transmit disease through natural aerosol. They can transmit disease through aerosol generating procedures, जैसे अगर आप intubate कर रहे हैं या nebulize कर रहे हैं. Direct contact, indirect contact. Enteric route transmission till now is not known. So that doesn't mean that it doesn't transmit by enteric route, but there's no data to say whether it transmits by enteric route or not. Okay. So all these kind of precautions are extremely important as a healthcare provider once you are treating patients with mild to moderate disease. Coming to the severity. Who are mild patients? As I told you, mild patients are those who have uncomplicated upper respiratory tract infection. They have just mild symptoms. Their respiratory rate is normal. Their saturation is normal. And they can be managed in home surroundings. Or if you go by the Government of India guidelines, they can be also managed at COVID care center in case home isolation is not available. Who are moderate cases? They are patients who have pneumonia. That means the disease has now gone down to lower respiratory tract. In case the adults, these patients will have symptoms, but their saturation will be less than 94 on room air. So, agar there is a patient who comes to you with less than 94%, is a moderate case, and the respiratory rate will be more than 24, but less than 30. So 24 to 30 respiratory rate and saturation less than 94% come under moderate disease. For children, we are discussing children because as we are seeing more and more kids being involved with COVID, so we'll discuss that part also. Respiratory rate less than 94, saturation less than 94, and respiratory rate more than 24. Same criteria. But if you look at smaller kids, 1 to 5 years, a respiratory rate of more than 40, and in kids of 2 to 11 months, a respiratory rate more than 50 shows that these patients are moderate disease, and less than 2 months, respiratory rate more than 60. So respiratory rate is a very important criteria of deciding whether this patient is in the mild category, moderate category, or severe category. The moderate category patients, as per Government of India guidelines, are treated in DCHCs and they may require ICU care. Coming to the core topic, that's the management. Treatment of COVID-19 depends on the stage and the severity of the disease. Because SARS-CoV-2 replication is greatest just before or soon after the symptom onset. It's very important. See, the chance of infection is highest in 7 days before the symptoms and 7 days during the symptoms. That is why we have to take care of every effort to decrease the viral load at that point of time. And that's why antiviral medications like remdesivir and antibody-based treatments, जो कि आज नए आ गए हैं इंडिया में, they have just been launched 2 weeks back, which is called as antibody cocktail treatment. They are likely to be more effective when used early. But when is the quick discussion, and we'll go into more details. Later in the disease, जैसे जैसे आप disease progress करेगा, viral load कम हो जाता है, but body का अपना inflammation starts coming. So a hyperinflammatory state and coagulopathy are thought to lead to complications. So later in the stages, the viral load goes down, but inflammation and coagulation becomes important. And that is why anti-inflammatory medications like steroids, immunomodulators like baricitinib and tocilizumab, anticoagulants like dalteparin, enoxaparin, and combination of these treatments may be more effective in the later stage of the disease. Similarly, if you go to my previous chart, the chart also showed the same thing. In the early phase, antiviral therapy is important. In the later stage, anti-inflammatory therapies, immunomodulator therapies are take a major role in the treatment. Now, the question is, how do you treat? First, let's look at glucocorticoids. We all know that India was hit by a wave of Blucher after the COVID pandemic, and we have seen a lot of mucor in intensive care in North India, but in South India and in Maharashtra also we have seen cases of mucor. There are a lot of reasons that have been found because mucormycosis occurred only in India. It did not occur in any place across the world wherever steroids were used. So, but there are thought to be three reasons which are plausible reasons for high mucor. One, overuse of steroids, longer duration of steroids, higher dosages of steroids, and uncontrolled glycemic control when you give steroids. So these are 3-4 reasons which are thought to be the reasons for higher incidence of mucor. But then let's stick to steroid. Where do you give steroid? Because of concerns that a hyperinflammatory state may drive severe symptoms. That is why immunomodulating therapies have been investigated. And there was this trial called recovery trial. I will suggest you all read it. What they did in recovery trial, they gave dexamethasone. The dexamethasone was given in the dose of 8 milligram once a day. And they proved that if you give dexamethasone, it reduces mortality among hospitalized patients. Okay. But the benefit was limited only to patients who receive supplemental oxygen. So the recovery trial shows that in moderate to severe cases, the steroids will be helpful. Moderate, particularly where oxygen supply or oxygen therapy is being given. They also proved that the greatest benefit of dexamethasone was in those patients who were on ventilators. But it did not improve outcomes. In fact, dexamethasone caused harm in patients who did not receive oxygen. And it is not recommended for mild cases or moderate cases who are maintaining saturation. So if you want to give dexamethasone or methylprednisolone, we have to give them in moderate cases who are requiring oxygen therapy. As soon as the patient goes on oxygen, we start them on steroids. And obviously, the best outcomes are those on severe disease on ventilator. But please, please, please do not give them in milder cases, in homebound cases. We have seen prescriptions where patients have been started on steroids from day one. If you give on day one, it has been shown to harm the patients. That's why the timing of steroid is only when the oxygen therapy is given. I hope this clarifies the confusion about the steroid. And please understand, there's very little data to show the role of high dose steroids. Now, how we do it practically? We start these patients on dexamethasone or methylprednisolone. The methylprednisolone is in the All India Institute protocol, and I'll show that protocol to you. The dose is 0.5 to 1 to 2 milligram per kg body weight. So we start with 1 milligram per kg body weight. So if there's an 80 kg man, we will give 40 milligram twice a day. And then we look at the CRP and the D dimer every 2 to 3rd day. If the CRP decreases, then we know this is the right dose. If the CRP increases, then we increase the dose of methylprednisolone to 2 milligram per kg body weight. Now there's a debate whether you give pulse steroid of 500 milligram or 1 gram. At this point of time, there is no data. But if the CRP doubles in next 48 to 72 hours, increase the dose of steroids to 2 milligram. So if you are dealing with a 60 kg man, you can go to 160 milligram of methylprednisolone on a daily basis. So we go to 80 milligram BD. Odd times when the patient is desaturating or we see that the inflammation is very high, we go to 125 milligram twice a day also. But we have never exceeded 125 milligram twice a day. But we see scenarios where patients are given 500 milligram, 1 gram. We would, I think the protocol should be not to give too high dose of steroids, but manage them with the lowest possible dose because it doesn't have additional benefit. Plus, it also puts the patient at increased risk of bad sugar control and a potential fungal infection later on. So this was about the steroids. Next is remdesivir. We know remdesivir is a very potent antiviral drug. And there were two trials on remdesivir. One was called ACT trial 1, ACTT. What did it show? It said that if you give remdesivir to one class of COVID patients and you give nothing to the other class, patients who received remdesivir has a higher chance of survival. And after this trial only, the interest in remdesivir became very high, to the extent that FDA gave emergency use authorization for remdesivir to COVID patients. And guidelines recommend that remdesivir should be used for the treatment of hospitalized patients with severe COVID disease. But at this point of time, the data is insufficient for its routine use in mild to moderate disease. Again, the same scenario that if you have to use remdesivir, use it in patients who are in moderate disease, who require oxygen, and obviously in severe disease. Use it early, but please do not use it in patients with mild disease. Decisions about the use of remdesivir in hospitalized patients with moderate disease should be individualized and it should be related to clinical deterioration. If the patient is going down, oxygen requirements are going up, then you are well within your rights to start remdesivir, particularly those patients who are on oxygen therapy. We all know the dose. There was a debate whether to give it for 5 days or 10 days. Initially, there's a data which shows that whether you give 5 days or 10 days is equal efficacy. But this season, this wave of pandemic, we have seen that if we give higher duration of antiviral, the patients recover a bit early. So that is why in a certain class of patients, we have started giving remdesivir for 10 days also. But please be very careful. Remdesivir is hepatotoxic and remdesivir is renal toxic. If you are giving remdesivir, please ensure that you have a baseline liver function test and a baseline kidney function test. And we repeat these two tests every 48 to 72 hours. In case the SGOT, SGPT go to more than 3 times the normal, we stop remdesivir. And if the creatinine goes up and we calculate expected GFR, if the expected GFR is less than 30, we stop remdesivir. So please be very vigilant while starting this therapy, particularly on the monitoring front. This is another therapy which has just been approved 2 weeks back by European Union, FDA, and also approved by Indian government under emergency use authorization. It is known by the common name of antibody cocktail. And there are two antibodies. These are basically monoclonal antibodies. What is available in India is the Pfizer antibody of casirivimab and imdevimab. Bamlanivimab and atezolizumab, I am not aware whether it is available, but the above combination has been launched and we have also given it in mild patients. What is it recommended? The use of bamlanivimab, casirivimab, imdevimab, and or bamlanivimab is approved for the treatment for mild to moderate disease in adults and pediatric population of 12 years and above and weighing at least more than 40 kg. There has been shown that data to show that it helps in clearing of the disease much earlier. Our patients where we gave monoclonal antibodies, actually some of them became negative on 8 and 9 days. So it's a good combination to give for the mild to moderate cases. Now, which patients are the ones who are at high risk and they should be considered for this combination? Obese patients who have a BMI more than 35, patients with chronic kidney disease, diabetics, immunosuppressed patients, those patients who are currently receiving some kind of a chemotherapy, age more than 65 years or age more than 55 years, but they have one cardiovascular anomaly, for example, hypertension or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or any other respiratory disease. So these are the patients who are the right candidates for monoclonal antibiotic therapy. If you look at kids between age of 12 to 17 year of age, patients who have a BMI of more than 85th percentile for their age and gender, patients with sickle cell disease, congenital heart disease or acquired heart disease, and patients with neurodevelopment disorders like cerebral palsy. So, yes, these antibody cocktails can be given to kids, but not less than 12 years of age.
Injection.
Now, what is the dose? The dose of casirivimab and imdevimab is 1200 milligram, and this is what the COVID-19 treatment panel recommends as far as giving the approval for their emergency use authorization is concerned. Treatment should be started as soon as possible after the patient received a positive result. जैसे ही positive आता है, you can start it, particularly within 10 days of onset. So mild disease within 10 days, COVID positive patient, high risk category, monoclonal antibodies can also be considered as an emergency use authorization. There are certain variants or mutants of COVID-19 which actually decrease the susceptibility to these antibody cocktails and to the other ones also. But then that is more from genomic sequencing. Clinical level, we recommend, and that literature also says that it should be given to almost all cases of mild to moderate cases with less than 10 days of duration. So, if I were to summarize the mild cases should be kept in a containment phase, whether they are suspected or a confirmed case, and they should be immediately isolated. Detailed clinical history is very, very important. We should look at the comorbidities, and patient should be under the care of a physician on a daily basis, whether at home or whether at a COVID care center. For children with mild disease, we should also monitor for signs and symptoms of clinical deterioration. I have already told what are the moderate cases in children: respiratory rate more than 40 or respiratory more than 50 or 60 depending on the age, and saturation less than 94%. These children should be evaluated for fast and shallow breathing, grunting for neonates, inability to breastfeed, blue lips or face, confused babies, inability to awake, drowsy, inability to drink or take any liquid. So these are some of the criteria of children where they may be progressing from mild to moderate disease. Mild COVID patients should only be given antipyretics for fever and pain, good nutrition, adequate hydration. We tell all our patients to drink at least 3 to 3.5 liters of water every day. So all the mild cases should be given just antipyretic and no other medication as far as the literature is concerned. Coming to moderate, as I told you, saturation less than 94 and respiratory rate more than 24 comes to a moderate category. They should be managed in a dedicated COVID health center. In case they are requiring oxygen therapy, they should measure, there should be a daily measurement of vital signs. We should get radiological examination, chest x-ray, CT scans if required, and lab investigations should also be sent, and treatment should be started accordingly. They should be admitted in a district COVID center, dedicated COVID health center, any medical college, and if they are requiring oxygen, they should be immediately shifted to the intensive care unit. Antibiotics should not be prescribed to these patients because generally bacterial infections don't happen. But if there's a clinical suspicion, you can. This is the AIMS and ICMR revised protocol for mild, moderate, and severe disease. So mild is, as I told you, physical distancing, indoor mask use, strict hand hygiene. In symptomatic management, we can give hydration, antipyretics, anti-cough and multivitamins. They should stay in touch with a treating physician through teleconsultation because they are COVID positive, and the patient should monitor the temperature and oxygen saturation diligently 3 to 4 times a day. Why do you seek medical attention? Medical attention will be required if the fever persists for more than 5 days, or if there's difficulty in breathing, or there's a high risk category, the patient falls in the high risk category. High risk categories we have already discussed, but I'll just reiterate for you. Age more than 60 years, patients with cardiovascular disease, hypertension and coronary artery disease, diabetic patients, immunocompromised patients, chronic lung, liver and kidney disease, cerebrovascular disease, and obesity. Any patient with high risk category should be deliberately monitored for conversion from mild to moderate cases. Any therapies that may be considered in mild, although antipyretic is the one. Ivermectin, we all know 12 milligram per day, and this is also in our protocol we can give, but it should be avoided in pregnant and lactating women. Similarly, AIMS protocol still says hydroxychloroquine, although we have stopped using hydroxychloroquine after negative outcomes. Inhalational steroids can be given through MDI up to 800 microgram should be given to take better control of the respiratory symptoms. Coming back to moderate, as we all know, saturation less than 94% and respiratory rate more than 24 shows moderate disease. These patients are admitted in the ward or in the ICU. Depending on the saturation, they will require oxygen therapy. The target saturation should be 92 to 96%, and the oxygen should preferably be started with a non-rebreathing mask, and later on we can increase the oxygen as and when needed. Awake proning should be encouraged to all moderate cases, and if they can't do awake full proning, at least partial proning should also be encouraged. Anti-inflammatory drugs and immunomodulator therapies should definitely be considered in moderate disease. As I told you, the literature was on dexamethasone, but we have used methylprednisolone, and that's also gives very good outcomes. Methylprednisolone 0.5 to 1 milligram per kg in 2 divided doses, usually for a duration of 5 to 10 days. See, the recovery trial said for 9 days, and AIMS protocol says 5 to 10 days. So, coming to the other, anticoagulation, all patients with moderate disease should be given heparin, any kind of heparin, whether it's enoxaparin, deltaparin, or unfractionated heparin. Please be mindful that in case there's a kidney damage, then you have to choose the dose and the type of heparin. Monitoring, one should always monitor for saturation, blood pressure, regular ECGs, which is clinical monitoring. A CT scan should be done as a baseline if the patient is requiring oxygen therapy. The most important, which is lab. We tend to actually give very less importance to lab, but that's not so. Please repeat CRP and D-dimer at least every 48 to 72 hours. If the CRP is going up, we generally go up on the dose of steroids. If the D-dimer is going up, we go up on the dose of the heparin. Only if the CRP starts decreasing after 48, we take rest and we start decreasing the dose of steroids. So, increasing and decreasing the medication in moderate entirely dependent on the clinical symptoms, the CT scan value, and the lab test that will repeat every 48 to 72 hours. Coming to the off-use label, on the right side, these are the there's a treatment of severe disease. At this point of time, we will not discuss it because that's the topic for the next class. Now, coming to these drugs which have been given emergency use authorization or off-label authorization. Remdesivir, the AIMS protocol says, should be considered only in patient with moderate to severe disease requiring oxygen, and that's what we should diligently follow. There is no renal or hepatic dysfunction. It should be normal KFT, normal LFT, and if the GFR is less than 30, we should not give it. AST, ALT more than 5 times the normal. Certain protocols say 3 times, certain protocols say 5 times. We follow 3 times the normal. You should not give it. Recommended dose of remdesivir, we all know 200 milligram first day, then 100 milligram for next 5 days. Not to be used in patients who are not on oxygen support. So please, please, please don't give remdesivir, also steroids, to those patients who are not requiring oxygen. Tocilizumab, again an immunomodulator, and what we normally do, any patient who comes into the hospital or deteriorates within 48 hours when he was in the hospital with the rising oxygen levels and rising inflammatory markers in the form of CRP and IL-6, and steroids have already been given, we give tocilizumab. So we give tocilizumab, but early. It has to be given within 10 days. Severe disease, okay, and inflammatory markers are very, very high. At that time, we arrange uh, tocilizumab because it's all under government control, and we prescribe it in 4 to 6 milligram per kg. Normally, it's 400 milligram for an adult. So the other drug that is now available is baricitinib. Baricitinib is a oral tablet, and it is to be given as a 2 milligram tablet. We give 4 milligram stat and then 2 milligram once a day. But in patients with kidney disease, it has to be decreased or stopped. Baricitinib has been shown to be good effects along with remdesivir in a recent NEJM trial, and that's why now we are using baricitinib plus remdesivir as a good protocol to actually help our patients with mild to moderate disease. Other management in moderate cases, oxygen support and anticoagulation. Target saturation, as I told, is about 92 to 96. We can decide any oxygen device, but please don't keep these patients less than 85. Sometimes in the ICU, I am seeing patients are on 78% oxygen, 75% oxygen, and they are still on non-rebreathing mask. No, please apply either high flow nasal cannula, and if you don't have, apply a BiPAP machine or an NIV machine. But to maintain a saturation of at least 90% is very, very, very important. Awake proning should be encouraged to all the patients of moderate disease and also as a rescue therapy. All patients should have a daily ECG. Previously, we used to think that the incidence of myocarditis in corona is extremely low. But in this season, this wave, we have seen a lot of myocarditis, symptomatic as well as asymptomatic. So a 12-lead ECG is must. If you are following up your patients, CRP, D-dimer, and ferritin every 48 to 72 hours should be done, and you should collect the report. Similarly, CBC, KFT, and LFC should be done on a daily basis. Hydroxychloroquine, although still part of AIMS protocol, is no more being practiced because literature has shown that it has no benefits. And obviously, methylprednisolone, 0.5 to 1 milligram per kg body weight, must be considered for all patients. Anticoagulation, 1 to 2 milligram, 1 milligram per kg body weight is the dose. You can use any anticoagulation, whether dalteparin or enoxaparin. Always keep a watch for increased work of breathing, hemodynamic instability, and increase in the oxygen requirements. If they are rising, the patient is definitely going into critical phase. With that, I end the talk. I hope it should be able to clarify some of the points, some of the confusion that is keeping in our minds. See, the literature in COVID is still evolving. We are getting research every month, and that is why it's a dynamic process. Whatever I have told you till now is the literature and the best evidence that is available in the current treatment of mild to moderate COVID. But as the treatment evolves and the research evolves, we'll continue to make the necessary changes. With this, I thank you to all the students for their patient listening. If there are any questions, you can write them on the chat box and I'll be happy to answer them. So this first question from Dr. Ashish Khune. Should we increase the steroid dose when subsequent CRP level increases? Very good question and very practical question, Dr. Khune. Yes, That's why we do a CRP level. See, please understand, first 7 to 10 days, there's no inflammation. And then the inflammation starts to rise. So if you believe that your clinically the patient is deteriorating and your CRP has gone up and you repeat it after 48 to 72 hours, we do increase the dose of steroids. As I told you, you can give methylprednisolone to zero point 0.5 to 1 milligram, but we sometimes go to 2 milligram per kg body weight also, but we don't go more than that. Any trial on steroids and CRP correlation? No, at this point of time, the only trial that is there is on the cytokine storm, which is a clinical recognition, and steroids, and CRP we have added as a corroborative phase. But when you will see, we just don't react to CRP. You have to see the clinical status of the patient. If your patient is more tachypnic, his respiratory rate has gone up, his oxygen saturation is falling, your oxygen requirements are going up, and the CRP is high, you will increase the steroids. But in case the patient is fine, non-tachypnic, oxygen level is okay, he's still in mild category, even if the CRP is high, we will not treat it. So it's a very good correlation that you have to maintain between clinical and the laboratory. What's your take on, sorry, this meeting. What's your take on steroids beyond 10th day of disease? Do you agree with recovery trial? See, last wave, we hardly needed to increase the steroid or continue beyond 10 days. But this phase of disease, we have seen that these patients sometimes are deteriorating even after 2 days or after second week or third week. Please understand, very rarely you will need to give steroid more than 10 days. The problem in our protocol is that we are starting steroid very early. If you are starting steroids on first day, and if the patient goes into cytocom on the 10th day, then actually we have added, we have given steroids for no rhyme and reason. The steroids have to be added once you are clear that the patient is in cytokine storm, inflammation is going up, and the patient has just been added on oxygen. So if you do go with this protocol, you will need to extend the steroid, but not to 4 weeks or 6 weeks, maybe by 4 days or a week. Next question is by Dr. Devendra. No, this is from. Just wait. I'm not able to see the questions. Yeah, now I can see. Next question is from Dr. Nikhil Chavan. What is the efficacy difference between dexamethasone and MPS in mild to moderate cases in pediatric patients? See, sir, the whole literature and the research has been done on dexamethasone. So our first choice to start therapy when we are doing in whether adult or pediatric is to start with dexamethasone. And since methylprednisolone is also very potent anti-inflammatory, we convert sometimes to methylprednisolone. In fact, not sometimes, a lot of times when we believe that dexamethasone is not able to do the job. So there's no efficacy difference as far as the data-wise is concerned. It is only dependent on the clinical benefit that we have seen, that methylprednisolone is able to give us more control of the storm as compared to dexamethasone. There's another question by civil surgeon Gachiroli. What is the role of aspirin and clopidogrel in post-COVID patient and how much dose given? Again, a very, very relevant question. You will see that a lot of patients in COVID have thrombocytosis because platelet is an acute phase reactant. So platelets will start going up. Majority of patients, the platelet goes to more than 5. If you look at the thrombocytosis guidelines and if you talk to your hematology colleagues, if the platelet starts to go to more than 5.5 lakh, we add aspirin and clopidogrel because these patients become at a high risk of thrombosis. Now, since they are at a high risk of thrombosis, We give ecosprin in the lowest possible dose, aspirin 75 milligram once a day. That is the only dose which is recommended for a secondary prophylaxis. If you want to give clopidogrel, you can give clopidogrel also. But keep a close watch on the platelets. Once the platelets start to get down to normal, we stop the ecosprin or aspirin on clopidogrel. We have also dependent on D-dimers. A lot of our patients have a higher D-dimer even post-COVID, and we keep these patients on antiplatelets and anticoagulants also, either in the form of apixaban or in the form of rivaroxaban for at least 4 to 6 weeks till the time that D-dimer comes to normal and the platelet come down to normal. I'm just looking for more questions. Yeah. This quote from Dr. Ashish Kune for everyone. Massachusetts, 20th April 2020 on steroids, and I quote, duration is 10 days or until discharge, whichever comes first. There is no data supporting use beyond 10 days for COVID-19 treatment, even if patient is not improving. I think we are giving steroids for longer duration. I completely agree with you, Dr. Pune. I think we are starting steroids way too early. We are starting steroids in our OPDs. We are starting steroids in home isolation patients. If we start the steroids at the right time, and the time is when the patient comes on oxygen, or when we are clear that the patient is going into cytokine storm, if we are starting the steroids at that point of time, I am sure we will not be able to give the longer duration. So the timing of every drug, COVID is a very complex treatment. It looks it's a very simple treatment. It's not. It's a very complex treatment where the timing of the drug is extremely important for the outcome. So if you give longer steroids, we'll end up with a lot of immune modulation leading to secondary infections, also leading to more of fungal infections. That's why we have to start at the right time, and then we'll not to give the longer duration. He also says even after the international trials, we are deliberately using the steroids. I'm just hoping that after this tutorial, some of our colleagues will be able to decide the timing and the dosage of steroids in a better way. See, steroids is a very good drug. This is the only drug which has been shown to decrease outcomes, decrease mortality and increase survival in COVID. That's why we have to use it, but we have to use it extremely judiciously and in a very, very clinical way. And please, statins and COVID-19. Okay, I don't know whether it's a question. So once you are looking at COVID patients, and we will discuss it in the next class when we are dealing with severe disease, what are the therapies that you can do to prevent post-COVID fibrosis? Statin is one of them. There is some literature which has shown that if you start statins early in the disease, you can actually prevent post-COVID fibrosis. We are giving statins to our patients, particularly those who are in moderate or severe illness. Yes, we should prescribe. But then with statins, please be very careful. Statins, if you give, you should have a baseline liver function test, because sometimes after statin, the LFT can derange. Second, you should get a regular CPK level, because myalgias and muscle aches and muscle pains are common. So you need to titrate the dose of statins according to the clinical condition of the patient. I guess we are with the end of the tutorial, and I cannot see any more questions here. But in case there are any more questions or you want this presentation, please write your email IDs and phone numbers on this chat box. Our team will reach out to you with the presentation. We'll send you the presentation, and you can also reach out to us emails for any queries or questions related to the management of COVID. Next class will be the management of severe cases. I'm really thankful to all the students for their patient listening. Good afternoon.
इथे घरी गेल्यानंतर एकूण ठेवल्यानंतर दुसऱ्या दिवशी त्यानंतर लावतो. कोण लावून मारतात असं नका कोरोना. प्रवासी नाही प्रवासी हो तू याच्या आधी कुठे ड्युटी करत होती पहिल्या कोविड मध्ये दोघी नाही तुम्ही दोघी तुम्ही किती होता मग आपला खर्चच नाही कारण आपण सकाळपासून संध्याकाळपर्यंत राहतो आणि काम ते आपल्याकडून पूर्ण काढून घेतात एक दिवस पूर्ण लाखो पैसे नसतो त्यांचा तरी पण 5 सीझर झाले ते 5,000 रुपये त्याला माग होते लढतो तेच 2 सीझर झाले तर 1 लाख रुपये बसते सर्व मेडिसिन मॅडमचं स्थिती आहे एक सीझरच्या मागे 37,000 37,000 रुपये मेडिकल स्वतःची राहते मेडिकल लॅब स्वतःची राहते दुसऱ्या पण त्यांच्याकडून कमिशन भेटते. लॅब फार्मसी हो सर्व एक्सरे सर्व तिथे सर आहेत ना सर्व सगळंच त्यांच्याकडे तरी सुद्धा त्यांनी 5,000 रुपये द्यायसाठी रडते. रोज मध्ये बोलतात कामं तर भरपूर जाते प्रायव्हेट मध्ये गव्हर्नमेंट पेक्षा जास्त आणि